appreciate everyone's attendance, and we would like to get started. We all know the last couple of years have been very exciting for blockchain, and many people have questions about what's happening right now. So today we have our esteemed guests. We have Michael Lee from zkSync, also, the former name Matter Labs. We also have Ryan from Algorand Foundation and Irene Wu from LayerZero. So I would love to, give a little bit of introduction for each one of our folks, but I think you guys probably do a better job. So please, Michael, would you like to tell us more about Matter Labs?
Right on. Do I need this or can I just talk?
You might have to talk as we'll have to feed it back to the
Right on. Sorry. Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for hanging in there. Michael from Matter Labs. We co-created zkSync with the broader ZK community. And previous to zkSync, I was at Activision Blizzard, the big gaming company. And then before that, been in crypto for a while. Started off in the Ethereum ecosystem, joined the early team at Dfinity, which was an offshoot of a lot of the early Ethereum and WebAssembly folks, and kind of made my way back to Ethereum mainly because I want to see Web3 games on, on blockchain. So very self-serving.
Let's talk more about that. Excellent. Hi, everyone. Ryan Terribilini from the Algorand Foundation. I lead Algorand Ventures, which is sort of our corporate VC offshoot of the foundation. So I have a lot of experience working in the blockchain space. I was an early employee at Ripple, San Francisco based, born and bred, slaying SEC dragons left and right. That's what we do. But yeah, good to be back. I was in Singapore the last 3 years. That's where the foundation's domiciled. Was just in Singapore last week, Token 2049.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some industry insights there to share with the group. Pretty crazy times, but yeah, happy to meet you all. And I think everybody stayed for the boat ride, not for this panel.
Yeah, but this time with Ryan, we decided not to meet in Singapore because the previous 2 times we met, the first time FTX happened, the second time, SVB went down.
In this building.
Yeah, we decided that we should not meet again because unfortunately everything goes down. So just kidding. But anyways, sorry about that.
Nothing's going down today.
All right, Irene, please.
Hi, my name is Irene. I'm head of strategy at LayerZero Labs. LayerZero Labs is the creator of LayerZero, which is the leading omni-chain interoperability protocol, and then also Radiate Finance, which is the most widely used native asset bridge. We work with DeFi protocols, we work with enterprise, TradFi, institutions, basically anything that is on chain and needs to send information from a chain to another chain. So in other words, we have built TCP/IP for blockchains.
Great. Awesome. So let's get started. We're exploring the interoperability, blockchain, tokenization, real assets, and also a more inclusive, decentralized, borderless, on-chain global economy. So with that, my first question is, when we think about really what is real in blockchain or crypto, a lot of people have been asking, right? The last few years I've seen tons of, shit coins, up and down. And also people have questioned quite a bit about, what happened? Why is that every company we found with billions of dollars goes bust just like that? So can you tell us more about what do you guys think is really the foundation of crypto blockchain? And what do you think we should be spending our energy focusing on building?
I'm happy to start. 2 immediate things come to mind. I think the first one is what is actually real as like the fundamental technology is distributed ledger technology, or the idea that you can publish something that's immutable and also decentralized or not able to be mutated by a centralized entity forever, I think is incredibly cool. And there are actually applications that, or there are actually problems that can be solved by this. And I think that some of the work we're doing with financial institutions demonstrates this. Like now there's actually very low latency, low fee transaction abilities between different permission networks run by JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. And it enables cross-border payments that are also geofenced, for example, or all these sorts of customizations you can add on top. And then you can apply this to solving problems in the world of art, sure, but then also the world of remittances. And I think so many different challenges that day-to-day people run into. That being said, I think at LayerZero, I often am trying to remind our team not to force technology where it doesn't need to go. And so we are most interested where there are already projects being built on chain that now need to be chain abstracted, or rather than being so embroiled in the specifics of particular chains, like needing to know the difference between an Ethereum or Polygon or Solana. It simply is just this application. And so there are like necessary elements that need to be abstracted away. And that's where LayerZero comes in. And I think the second thing is when people say real world assets, which are now being tokenized, what is a real world asset that is actually or has actually reached product market fit are stable coins. Like this is the RWA that has already achieved product market fit. And there is a real use for this. There are many, many people who simply just hold their capital in stablecoins or tokens that are pegged to some sort of currency and therefore aren't volatile. What is now even more interesting is stablecoins that are backed by treasury bills. So now you can hold an asset that is 1-to-1 with the US dollar, but you also generate yield on top of that. And some examples of this are USDY, USDM, Matrix Explorer issued STBT. So if you think about that, you can then change a lot of different microeconomies when you think about payroll, for example, or different processes that require fast payments getting to the end user. Maybe these are employees, but then also additional yield that can be generated and then further distributed out.
Great. Thank you for that explanation. Michael?
Yeah, no, what is going to get traction? Like, I think if you harken back to like the rise of the commercial internet, no one had any idea, right? That you would have Facebook, Twitter, Uber, WhatsApp. So I think it's hard to actually see, what's going to actually get mass adoption. I don't know, like even a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. But the thing, if you look back and you kind of connect the dots and you look at blockchain or crypto from the perspective of computing paradigms, like that's pretty consistent, right? Like you'll see like from the 90s mainframes, like just treat these things as, execution layers, right? I'm just deploying software. So there's mainframes and that shifted to client server. And then that turned into proprietary cloud that you see with AWS. And then eventually you saw the containerization with Kubernetes and Docker. And with each of these shifts, it's anywhere between 8 to 15 years. So like it's been a minute since, containerization and mobile. So we're due up for something. Is it blockchain? Maybe. Quantum computing, machine learning, AI. Like you can kind of go through all the trends. And probably the thing that is the most battle tested and kind of ready from as an emerging technology perspective, it's blockchain. Now, how all these chains kind of, how they specialize for what use cases and what's like the delightful thing that, is obvious, later on, not sure. But then the way that I think about it is you look at anything, and especially because I come from gaming, and you look at, gaming as it's evolved from, say, like console and desktop into mobile. And so you're looking for these use cases where if it's really well built and designed, it'll launch to 1 million people. And then if it really gets adoption, it'll quickly scale to 10, 20, 30 million people. What is that in, Web3? There's very few use cases other than a game that can reach those eye-popping numbers. And coming from Activision Blizzard, like we had about 400 million monthly active users. There's games out there, out of Tencent where there's 100 million, daily active users. So some version of that is going to hit crypto, and it's going to be kind of taking advantages of like really unique properties that only the blockchain can provide as a computing environment.
Sorry, can I segue into this? Just so for the audience to understand, how is your technology related to gaming? Like how does the gaming studios work with you guys or leverage your technology?
Yeah, actually just got announced today where Pudgy Penguins, which is a kind of top 5 NFT collection, which, if you look at the last 6 months, it's probably the dominant NFT collection. They've been quietly working on a unique go-to-market strategy where they had this like prominent NFT collection and still do. They then had these little plushies, these toys. And today they announced that these toys are now moving into a little over 2,000 Walmart stores. And
20,000.
No,
I thought it was 20,000.
Oh, is it? Oh,
Lucas
geez.
said, yeah.
Oh, that's a lot of Walmarts.
I think Lucas said
And
that.
then the unique thing is that inside these little boxes of plushies, you have a QR code. And that QR code scans you into what they call Pudgy World, which is an open world game. And that is running on zkSync. And I think what they get out of that is, again, like now you're getting like super nerdy and like specific, but it's called what we call native account abstraction, right? So when you see a lot of these Web3 games, they're all dead on arrival, right? Because the moment that you see a game where it hits you with what? Connect a wallet, create a wallet, you're done, right? Because coming from gaming, it's hard enough to push out a mobile game. Like those things have to be so easy to just try. And eventually you kind of get through the funnel and you eventually turn these things into billion-dollar franchises off of like a 1% to 3% conversion rate. So when you're hitting, at the top of the funnel, this huge roadblock or creating an impediment for yourself, you're not going to get that 1% conversion where it turns into a billion-dollar franchise. So then you see these games like Decentraland, where I think they had 28 daily active users at one point. Like eventually, and that's what happens when the funnel kind of comes down, right? So I think what the Pudgy world does is that they use zkSync, native account abstraction, where when you play that game, you have no idea you're on the blockchain. You just scan the QR code from your toy or just go to pudgyworld.com and you just start playing. And then you kind of start making friends. You start, going on quests, unlocking traits, and all that stuff is, the things that need to be player progress, traits, different items. Like those are all on chain where that you own that, right? And then eventually you can trade it with your friends, potentially sell it, buy it. And these are kind of unique properties that only a blockchain can provide. And so smart people will figure that out, like the Pudgy game.
Can I ask how zkSync monetizes all those users that are going to be coming into this Pudgy world? Because that'll speak to a dynamic I'll talk about later, I think, when it comes to the funding environment, the partnerships environment, how that piece works.
I think with zkSync, it's different. We're just an extension of Ethereum, right? Like that's been our core mission is, Ethereum as a settlement layer where we just make it go fast. It's for people who, like Luca, the Pudgy Penguins team, who want to build on Ethereum because that's where they kind of naturally started. And that's where they feel like that's where all the liquidity is, that's where all the users are. It's been battle tested since 2015. And so we just make it go fast. It's pretty simple. And then as people use the network, eventually that kind of hopefully becomes self-sustaining. And as more things jump on it, great. The cost of using the network, goes down.
Well, some people say 70-80% of the population only use Ethereum, right? So it's kind of a habit building. In terms of announcements, I know LayerZero has also some really exciting announcements. So would you like to walk us through, what's the latest?
Sure. Yeah. And it's funny that you mentioned Pudgy Penguins. Pudgy Penguins has integrated LayerZero throughout their stack. And so, as I explained before, LayerZero is essentially TCP/IP for blockchains. And so you can think of all these different chains, layer ones, layer twos, even layer threes, as microservices or even programming languages. And when you set out to build something, you don't ask yourself, what can I build with C++? You usually come up with something you want to build to solve a problem and then walk backwards to what your tools are to create that. So that's front-end languages, back-end programming languages, ML ops, all these sorts of tools. And zkSync and Algorand, for example, are ecosystems that you can leverage and use LayerZero under the hood as almost like piping infrastructure to, assign settlement for one of these chains or pull in liquidity for one of these others. But then for the end user experience, they don't even know that they're touching 8 different blockchains. They have a totally chain abstracted experience if you would like to design it that way. So Pudgy Penguins integrated LayerZero so that their NFTs can move seamlessly between several different chains. And it's important for their strategy that they pull in a bunch of different communities and make it as user-friendly as possible. Our big announcement was that last week, both in Singapore and in Austin, we announced a 1-year-long engineering collaboration we did with Google. They collaborated with us to build a custom oracle for the LayerZero network. And this is a very significant step for them since they previously had worked with teams by having teams use their cloud services, for example, which is a pretty standard engagement with, services like AWS or Azure or Google Cloud. Or they would run one out of thousands of validators for a network. But in this case, they had a team commit a year's worth of engineering time to building an Oracle. And Oracles are a space that I think could use some disruption since there currently exists a pretty significant monopoly, and there's a need for it. Nearly every project on chain needs to use an Oracle.
Yeah, that is really exciting. So one of the trends I noticed, at least in the last couple of cycles, right, we've seen a lot of like mainstream consumer, using it for trading. But this time around, seems like a lot of the platforms out there, you guys are really focused on enterprise, right? We're talking about enterprise adoption, getting major Fortune 500 companies, gaming studios, making sure that they're the ones really driving that forward. So how do you guys think about planning this out, right? Which one, I guess each one of your organizations, what are the most important, performance metrics, I guess, for you guys when it comes to taking off with enterprise adoption?
Yeah, the way I've thought about it before, and I like to break it down like this, is you're sort of riding different market cycles. And within those market cycles, you have to adapt your strategy to get or end users aggregated, basically. So for any layer 1 blockchain ecosystem or a LayerZero or a layer 2 rollup, you basically have to be we are a developer to developer platform. We have a set of tools that will enable the creation of some sort of application. And that application is going to bring people in the door by some way, shape, or means. Maybe in the last cycle where capital is cheap, you might have a token associated with your chain. You've got a big treasury. Well, sure, you can go sign major gaming studios. You can do some sort of big deal or something like that. And that should kind of create some headlines, which can either further enhance your token dynamics, bring new people in the door, or ultimately just subsidize game development or user acquisition costs. So I think we're at a point now where obviously that gig is kind of up. I kind of cynically say often, the best product in blockchain is the press release. Obviously, there's some real technology and stuff happening, but that game is dead. And now it's all about building real stuff, getting real users, and making sure that there's actually a validated product market fit for what people are bringing to market. So I think that requires a lot of really thorough thinking. It still requires a lot of experimentation. There's no just magic bullet, oh, this is the use case for blockchain and all of a sudden is going to take off or kind of be that inflection point that we're all hoping to see. But at the end of the day, people just got to keep building. And so technology is there to do it.
Michael, any thoughts on it?
Enterprise adoption?
Yeah.
Having come from the Kubernetes ecosystem, so the rise of containerization, enterprise adoption cycles are notoriously slow. They're anywhere from 24 to 36 months. And that's after all the cool kids are using it. So with containerization, you saw all the cool kids using Docker. And that was off the trend of what they called microservices. So you have someone like Netflix. You treat that as a monolithic app, a singular app. But it's really 25,000 microservices that allow Netflix to be Netflix. And it expresses itself very differently as you travel the world, right? And so someone like Comcast, their CEO, I would imagine, gets super frustrated. They can't even change a singular button on their website. It takes 6 months, and it's all these teams from around the world, and it's because it's this monolithic application, and that's where containerization got really, really big, off of the back of this really interesting trend called microservices and cloud native architecture, and I think that's with everything, right? Going back to the changing computing paradigm, how people build software and your ability to rapidly build software, that was the big trend in 2015. And then as they saw these cool kids doing this with, on Docker, eventually Google kind of created Kubernetes, open source, containerization solution. And you saw people taking that and bringing that to market in these commercial, versions, because, at some point you don't want to manage 10,000 containers. That's just a nightmare. But you just saw really interesting, some forward thinking folks like GE, Boeing, Ford, really try to come after I think back at the time it's called digital transformation. So there was something where they had to pivot existentially, right? To, Tesla was eating, everyone's lunch. So all the car makers had to be good at software. IoT was a big thing. So all the industrials were trying to get into it. SpaceX was blasting off. So then Boeing had to figure out how to get to, Mars itself. So I think with all these things, these shifts in computing really start with what are the cool kids doing? And eventually are there bigger trends that essentially solve something existential for the big enterprises. And you're probably going to see that at some point really soon because you see all this value being created, right? So whether it's, Pudgy Penguins creating this open Pudgy World game, or it's, I don't know, it's, some kind of social media service, or even like DeFi with Uniswap. Like you see these big enterprises looking, right, at DeFi, for example, and they're like, well, there's something there. And at some point, it's going to get to a point where they're going to have to, make a bet is in that in the rest of this decade, like we have to have an opinion on, DeFi or whatever DeFi represents to, people in far off places outside of probably, places like the US or Western Europe.
Yeah. So speaking about US versus the outside the US, we've noticed that the last few years in the US has been a little bit interesting with the SEC, right? You mentioned that, Ripple's case, also just SEC chief really trying to make a statement, I would say, right? So how do you guys think about regulation, right? What is the future of regulation for blockchain infrastructure? Is that something you guys are worried about? How would you kind of see it from a startup founder's perspective when they're trying to build alongside many of you guys?
The future is highly fragmented, which is unfortunate because at the technology layer, it seems quite interoperable, quite open, standards based. So yeah, I don't think there's any one size fits all solution. I think different countries are going to have regulatory agencies that view the risks of this technology differently. And as such, they will architect their regulatory regimes in a different way. So, I mean, at least in the US, the feeling is like, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So rather than kind of triaging what bad actors look like or kind of prioritizing something like investor protection, which I think is a noble and novel goal for any regulator to go after, right? They're just like, this thing touches a blockchain and it's probably bad. So, we want you to comply. But then it's like, what does compliance look like? You haven't even answered that question, how you register. So I think, looking at good actors that are trying to get regulated and get clarity, and then their inability to do so kind of has put a chilling effect in the US that is to the benefit of other jurisdictions that are more experimental, more risk-taking. I spent the last 3 years in Singapore. Mm-hmm. They made really good faith efforts to kind of engage with industry and have a pretty clear regime for registration for different types of market actors, custodians or market operators as well. So people have come in and, they've learned a lot in the process. And I think their system is a bit more resilient as a result, despite the fact that, a lot of busts have happened, right? Three Arrows goes down. There was Singapore regulated exchange fund, not an exchange, HODL, not some others. So, despite the best efforts, things are still going to blow up, but at least there are going to be some learnings along the way. And every time something like that happens, hopefully the system is a bit stronger as a result of the learnings and kind of the postmortem that happens. So
the MAS actually just released, I think this morning, the framework for interoperable tokenized assets. So Singapore is very, very advanced in this way. A lot of the primary market makers in our space are opening offices in Singapore and closing shops in Chicago, even in London. Like they're just fully moving to Southeast Asia and East Asia. And I think watching A16Z open an office in London also just shows the general sentiment that it's not a great move to base your blockchain-centric organization in the United States, and that there's a lot more you can do right now in Europe if it's primarily financial institutions you're interfacing with, and then Asia for that same reason, but then also for gaming and DeFi.
I think Singapore is really case in point, because the irony of Singapore is that they are very, very restrictive when it comes to marketing to retail users of blockchain. Like literally they have F1, there's crypto exchanges all over the cars typically. And they're like, in Singapore, no. You have to take off the sideboard because that's going to be on TV. Like if you're there, it's an international audience. You guys can see the OKX logo. But if you're watching on TV in Singapore, no, that's off limits. And I think it just speaks to the fact that they recognize the value of the technology to markets infrastructure for payments, for securities settlement, things like that. But at the same time, they're like, we don't want our 70-year-old pensioner who's still driving a taxi to touch this shit, right? Like, that's fair enough, Fire's hot, you might get burned. So they realize that.
So we're on the topic of tokenizing assets. I know that, for us, we've looked at tokenizing private shares. We looked at, tokenizing real estate. There are a lot of folks who are also tokenizing maybe, like, for example, I think there's a BMW collaboration. So just curious, like, what's your stance? I don't know, Ryan, maybe you guys have invested in areas like that. Yeah. Can you tell us more about, like, where do you see actual momentum in the tokenization of real assets, and where do you see challenges as well?
So glad you asked. So one of our favorite portfolio companies is a company called Lofty. They've tokenized 130 single family homes in the United States. It's about $30 million of market value on chain. And, I think every time I have a discussion about real world asset tokenization, the question is always sort of, what is the Venn diagram of, like, here's an asset class. It's got some value. It's got some yield. It's got some sort of financial properties that might be attractive. And then you're putting it onto a blockchain. You're tokenizing it, for lack of a better word. Then where is that capital base on that blockchain that is going to come and actually, allocate capital into that asset class? So I think every kind of tokenization discussion should sort of start there. But at the same time, there's like different ways to get distribution and go to market, right? And that's where regulation and kind of other standards come into play. So I think the challenge is the fragmented regulatory landscape. Where is the captive audience? Where's the captive capital? In the case of Lofty, I think it's quite novel and unique because it's basically like, okay, a lot of their users don't even realize they're using Algorand. They've tied into Circle. They've tied into payment processors. So really, from their perspective, they're just coming in $50. I own a piece of this house. It pays me rent in my wallet every day. Isn't that cool? They don't even realize it's a crypto wallet. That's where I think we need to go.
Awesome. Pretty impressive. I've never used Lofty before.
Check it out.
When I get asked about real world assets and like why tokenize all these things, usually like the first things that come to mind are you can fractionalize them, and that's a great example. Yeah. A person may not be able to buy a home, but you can now buy a piece of a home and get the returns on that. It's also liquid, whereas previously with other kinds of investment vehicles, it might not be liquid, but now you have a tokenized version of that, like a treasury bill, and then you can generate more leverage on top of it, put it into some other protocol. You could lend it, borrow something else, do some other complex strategy. It's certainly not something that I think is friendly to the ordinary American, for example, right now. But for institutions that have really savvy trading strategies, you can do a lot with this, and you can do a lot with it at scale. So I think the ability to fractionalize and make these assets more liquid is really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I have to also talk about one of our, sister companies. When we first met some of the younger generation, like I'm talking 20s, right? When they looked at our site, they're like, oh, okay, so, Web 2.0 fintech. Then they're like, wait, but I only have crypto. I don't have all my money in fiat currency. Can I just use my USDT or USDC? And we're like, that is a good question. So, we built a platform that just allowed them to do this. And funny enough, back in 2014, when I met Vitalik, he was like, you should totally build MarketX on chain. I was like, that makes a lot of sense. And then we went to China. Obviously that didn't happen. So, China was like, we want to do centralized, blockchain. They already had a 10-year plan for, the China digital yuan, right? Mm-hmm. So how do you guys see about sort of this, government relationship? Because obviously, like you said, very fragmented. Every, government, maybe Switzerland, Singapore, Dubai, or, UAE, more friendly to this, whereas other countries very anti this whole decentralization concept. But, the majority of the population are living in these countries, right? So where do you see kind of that going, right? Where do we see potentially a tipping point, or how do you see the majority of the population adopt this new paradigm?
I don't think the next 100,000 people will even adopt crypto until you can abstract away things like needing multiple wallets or multiple gas tokens. I spend so much time in fully crypto environments. It's so refreshing to be here in this building because I walked through Shack 15 and I was like, these are people working on things that aren't crypto. And I just thought through how I'd explain what I'm doing to any of those people out there. And it was such a reality check. And I already think so much about the concept of chain abstraction and interoperability. But yeah, I mean, even my best friend, if I begged her to set up a wallet and buy or swap USDC for USDT on chain, she just wouldn't. So it's so difficult because not only is it that you go to a DeFi protocol and you take on the smart contract risk to perform that swap, but you need gas tokens. Like, I don't know how crypto native any of you guys are here, but to perform an action on chain, you need a specific token that corresponds to that chain to pay a fee in order to actually realize one of these actions on chain. And oftentimes you don't have the necessary gas tokens. You have to open a new tab and go to a centralized exchange and buy them. And then you have to go back. And you think about traditional software development or like web design, you've churned at that point. Like if you have 6 different clicks and you have 6 different tabs, you've definitely churned. So I think like that level of obfuscation needs to be solved first before we even think about like the whole world using it together.
And for this exact reason, on-chain metrics of users is down across the board, across every single layer one that I look at least. And because there's no motivation to actually go through all those painful steps to acquire a token that has no speculative value at this point in the market cycle, right? I mean, and a lot of engagement with DeFi has that kind of yield premium that people are hunting for.
So sorry for changing topics here. I remember I was in Paris for ECC this year, right? And everyone was telling me, ZK. Can you tell us why is everyone in crypto so excited about ZK?
Yeah, no, it's probably because Vitalik mentioned 2 years ago that the future, at least for Ethereum, is ZK. So at least if you're unfamiliar with Ethereum, in order to actually properly build on Ethereum in a cost-effective manner, and actually use services, applications that actually, run at, tolerable speeds, you're either deploying it on an optimistic rollup or a ZK rollup, zero knowledge rollup. And I think optimistic rollups were the first technologies to kind of make Ethereum go fast. And I think as Vitalik was pondering this, he kind of saw that, the future eventually, the mid and the near long term would be ZK. Thought that, this was about 5 years out. And then the folks at Matter Labs kind of pulled it off in about 18 months. Put it out there as the first kind of ZK solution. And then we've just been kind of chipping away at it and onboarding other people in the ecosystem. And I think now, Matter Labs started, 5 years ago? So now, this is like 5 years worth of just grinding. You're now seeing, everyone catching up. They've been building on Ethereum. They've been building on optimistic, rollups. Then figuring out all right, what else is there? And then eventually they kind of land on ZK. And I think it's finally ready now to where you're able to push out games and hybrid, decentralized exchanges and a lot of things that just weren't possible prior, at least in the Ethereum ecosystem. Can't speak for Algorand and Solana and other environments, but I think that's where all the excitement is. Like now, it's like you're playing a video game and you've kind of passed a level and all these goodies are unlocked, and I think that's what people got really excited about in Paris. And people were actually building these things, like the Pudgy Penguins folks, if you've been following closely, or there's people who are building really interesting decentralized exchanges like Uniswap, where it's decentralized but it has like that Robinhood feel to it, user feel. And then there's other folks who are building some version of digital identity that is not WorldCoin, but it has like the same use case of putting your driver's license, birth certificate, marriage certificate on a blockchain instead of just having some kind of like physical version of this stuff. So I think a lot of that stuff is now available and people are just building away.
So
cool to see.
Yeah, that's definitely very, I think, like you said, not a lot of people know about this. So just to give everyone an idea, right? I think you guys went from 0 to 3 billion in like a year.
No, not in a year.
1.5.
Our seed was I think first early round was like 9 million, then it's 50 million, then it was 150 million, 1 billion, and then 3 billion. So we announced our Series B, which was the 3 billion round in April.
Gotcha. And then just remind us where you guys at.
I think the last round that we had was a Series C, and that was like close to $1 billion.
Yeah. So clearly, we are still seeing very reputable companies being built, and a lot of institutional money has gone into it. So what do you guys see maybe a little different from like the regular, Joe's eye, right? Because a lot of people think of crypto, they just think a lot of retail investors. Where do you see institutional money going? And why do you think, in terms of your cap table, you were able to capture that institutional audience?
I think for us, the success of LayerZero does not depend on like the big ups and big downs in retail interest, even like the NFT market, because what we enable or what our protocol enables is arbitrary contract invocation with the bytes of rights, just information passing between disparate networks. And so long as any form of blockchain is utilized, it could be 2 chains, it could be hundreds of them, thousands of them, just L2s and one layer one, whatever it is, there needs to be a way to communicate packets of information, which can be value, can also be metadata, can be anything between them. And so the product market fit is there for LayerZero, and we scale so far as, blockchain technology is adopted, not specific to what kind. So of course, we're really, really excited about different technologies that make it more likely for there to be really, really large entrants into the space. We're super lucky to have our 2 leads follow on for this most recent round. So that was A16Z and Sequoia, and have interest from teams like PayPal and Franklin Templeton, for example. These are some of the people on our cap table, and they are actively building out products themselves that will go live in the next 12 to 18 months that are on-chain.
Great. So I think we're running out of time again. Any last words for the audience? Like, what is the one takeaway you want them to have for, crypto, but also blockchain infrastructure as a whole?
So I would say play the long game. Like, this is what I tell everyone. If you kind of take a time machine and you go back to the rise of the commercial internet, mid to late 90s, and you bet on the rise of the commercial internet, you would be directionally right. But if your portfolio consisted of, AOL and Yahoo and, MySpace, Napster, like, you would be, just too early, right? You would have missed out on Amazon and, Uber and Pinterest and all these wonderful experiences that, happened, 5, 7, 8 years later. And so much of crypto and Web3 at this moment feels similar, right? Where we're in the early days of, by 2030, it's going to be very obvious, painfully obvious, that this is going to be a dominant computing environment. But,
but nobody knows which one.
Yeah, right? So at least for us, it's really just betting on, like, the bet that people have on zkSync is that Ethereum will attract 1 million developers and 1 billion users. And that's probably like a decent bet, but it's not guaranteed. And I think every other, there's 10,391 coins out there, like, everyone's going to have to, ensure that they cross that chasm by providing actual value to either developers or to users. So we'll see.
I'm going to give 2 bits of seemingly contradictory advice, but I'm not sure how exactly counterintuitive they might be. So the first is picks and shovels, who built San Francisco, right? It's not the people who are the gold miners. It's the people who made the jeans that all the miners wore, that kind of stuff. So I think there's some great infrastructure technology companies. And if this is the compute platform of the future, there's going to be a lot of value accrual to the builders of those tools and the deployers of those tools. So that's 1. 2 is prioritize liquidity. Like, you don't know when the market tide is going to go out. We're going to be in an extended kind of withdrawn period. So focusing on your time to exit or time to liquidity for any side of investment, whether it's equity, whether it's tokens, whether it's a yielding asset of some kind, I think is pretty essential. So that might be counterintuitive because private companies are not liquid, but maybe MarketX can help with that. I don't know.
Thank you for the plug. I appreciate it. As you guys know, we're secondary focus liquidity platform. So thank you, Ryan, there. But with that, thanks for our panelists. That concludes our whole day of panels. So I appreciate you guys for coming. We just have one last words, and maybe we can have everyone go over there. Ben, would you mind just get a photo together, and then we'll do a lasting remarks, and then we'll be going to the boat.
Over here?
Yeah. Thank you.